Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiega, here on Friday, December 20th. After a bit of days away from the show, getting back on here for the holidays and the break period. We're going to have a couple of days off here at GSMC, a couple of days this week, and then probably this upcoming week, no shows for the week of Christmas, and then we'll be back again the following week for a couple days before we're fully into the swing of things once the new year starts and everything like that. But we are getting close to the end of the year, the calendar year, and also the end of the NFL calendar year, at least the regular season, because we have about 3 to 2 weeks left here in the NFL. Week 16 started last night with the Chargers and Broncos game that we're going to get into on today's show. Plus, being away for a couple days, we're going to get into the game picks, both part 1 and part 2 in today's show, as well as talking about the first Saturday edition of the NFL tomorrow, with the Ravens playing the Steelers and the Texans playing the Kansas City Chiefs. All of that coming up on today's show. But before we get started, I'd like to mention to you guys, again, if you were unaware, if you guys want to get involved with the show in any way, with any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to do so. We always appreciate your input and insight on anything you'd like to bring up or any of the topics we are currently talking about as well during these live shows. So please make sure to go and do that. But also, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. And this way, I'm able to see your question, and it guarantees that I read it out loud and feature it on the show. And that way, get a different perspective on maybe something you guys are thinking about or anything on the current topic. Anything really adds to the show, and it always makes it a lot better. So again, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box, and that way you're able to use the Super Chat feature and getting involved with the show. So that is that, and we are able to move on now to our first topic here, being the game we saw last night. A pretty entertaining one, as usually divisional games go. This one was in the AFC West. We saw, curiously, only the second time this year that the Chargers have scored 33 points, and it was the first loss for the Denver Broncos when they've scored 21 or more points. Yesterday, all of that to say that yesterday was a pretty high-scoring game. Looking around at what people thought of the game going in, a lot of people thought there would be a very heavily defensive contest, like a 21 to 16 type of game, right? I was honestly leaning that way as well. Based on the first game, I'm pretty sure it was only like 23 to 17 the first time around, but this one was a lot more high scoring, obviously, and the Chargers came away on the winning end once again. This was a second meeting between them. Yeah, it was 23 to 16 the first time around in Denver, and now the Chargers returned home, and they were able to overcome a deficit in the second half and win this game to sweep the Broncos. And the Chargers, came away with the win to not only sweep the series, but the final score was 34 to 27. And now the Chargers have the same record as the Broncos at 9-6. And it's important to mention both of their records being the same thing, because the Chargers have swept them, and the fact that they have the same record and are both in the playoffs, the Chargers obviously have that head-to-head record advantage over them. So instead of heading into this game where the Chargers were actually the 7th seed because they had lost 2 games in a row, and because the Broncos were on a 4-game winning streak, the Broncos had actually jumped up to the 6th spot. And depending on how you view the matchups, the Broncos would have been playing most likely the Steelers or the Ravens, depending on whoever won that division. But now, with the way the Chargers won, them having the same record and all, now the Chargers move back up to the number 6 spot, and it would be the Chargers playing either the Ravens or the Steelers and things like that. Not so much of an importance to who's playing the Steelers, but who's trying to avoid playing the Bills, right? I think that's really the most important thing, because I think anybody matching up with the Steelers or the Ravens would feel a lot better, honestly, than going to Buffalo in probably like a blizzard or something and then just getting pummeled on by the Bills. The Bills have not lost at home this season, so that's not a favorable matchup for anybody, quite honestly, in the AFC. So that's really what I think it comes down to in terms of the seedings and things like that, the 5, the 6, and the 7th seed, all of that, trying to avoid the Bills and probably the Kansas City Chiefs as well. But talking about the playoffs here a little bit more, specifically with these two teams, right? We're looking at the Broncos first, and what a win would have meant for them, would have meant that they would have clinched a playoff scenario. But with the loss, now they still have an 85% chance to make it and need just one more win over the last couple weeks here against the Bengals or against the Kansas City Chiefs to clinch a playoff spot the first time in, I want to say, at least 9, maybe even 10 years, almost 10 years. But they still got a good chance of doing it. It's still in their hands, which is still a good thing. So they just got to go out and defeat a Bengals team that's also trying to get into the playoffs. They needed to win out. So that's going to be a pivotal game coming up after that. And the Chiefs game also, it's huge, but the Chiefs, by that time might be resting some starters, so it all could be subject to change over the next couple weeks depending on various results. So the Broncos still, despite the loss, still hold their future in their hands if they can win one of the next 2 games. Then, looking at the Chargers, their chances flew through the roof yesterday after they won. Now they have a 97% chance to make the playoffs with that win, and it can be 100% secured next week if the Colts or the Miami Dolphins lose as well. But I'm sure if the Chargers just end up winning out, they're going to make it into the playoffs anyway. So very much like the Broncos, they too have their future potentially secured in their hands if they could just handle business or get a little bit of extra help with the Colts and the Dolphins losing on top of that. But on the game yesterday, just talking over it a little bit more, it wasn't a great start for the Chargers, right? When I was checking on it on my phone, I was pretty surprised that the Broncos, got off to such a hot start. At one point, going into halftime, the Broncos were actually up 21-13, and based on that score, I was thinking wow, the Broncos put up 21 points in the first half. That's something I wasn't expecting, going back to the point about, potentially betting the under if you were, doing that last night, betting the under, and it's definitely not on your side at that point. But I was pretty surprised by that, and it went back to even last week where the Chargers lost to the Buccaneers they lost to them 40-17 or something like that. So piling that performance on top of last night, I'm thinking the Chargers, I was hoping we weren't going to see the typical Chargers performance, right, where they collapse towards the end of games or towards the end of seasons and just find new ways to surprise you in ways that they blow, leads or games or their own scenarios, right? But, it was very promising to see how the second half went, obviously, but it was a little concerning because considering the second half of the Buccaneers game and the first half of this Broncos game, the Chargers had been outscored 48-13 in those games, the second half and the first half of last night's game. So that was a bit worrying, but there was some reports, and then just after the game, talking to, Derwin James, how he mentioned some things, how he actually gave a halftime speech instead of, Jim Harbaugh, right? And more so focused on the defense and just them, kind of getting them to react, right? Because they've been so good the entire year, basically, and now the last couple of games are starting to have second thoughts. So that speech definitely worked because after the first half, where they gave up 229 total yards, they only gave up 107 total yards in the second half. And I thought they did a good job of not only, corralling Bo Nix a little bit more because he was running a lot in the first half, but, everything just was more crisp and efficient. There wasn't any, lapses in coverage or anything like that, or over pursuing, Bo Nix and letting him run up the middle. I thought they tidied everything up, and it looked a lot more like the old Chargers defense than what we had been seeing over the last couple weeks. And what was pretty interesting, though, in this game, too, was before, we went into halftime where you kind of felt the Chargers needed something, and I didn't think it was going to be like this, but the Chargers, were in a situation where there was 8 seconds left in the first half, and Jim Harbaugh called the timeout and made the Broncos punt it, right? You're thinking, why is he doing that? It doesn't even matter. They're not going to do anything, right, in 8 seconds. But still, he went through it, and the Broncos punted, and the punt returner for the Chargers called the fair catch as the time had already expired, right? So really, there was nothing to do. But a Broncos defender ran into the kicker or just interfered with him in a way which, drew the flag, but there was no time left. So what do, right? It was a very niche and very unique situation in this scenario where, because the time ran out, there is still a penalty flag, so you got to call it. And basically, because the foul was accepted and there was a foul, the Chargers had an option to kick how did they put it? Like a free kick, basically. They had an opportunity to have a free kick, right? And it was very weird. I've never seen anything like it, obviously, but they lined up about 57 yards away. It was a 57-yard field goal attempt, basically, like a free kick, obviously, because of the fact that time ran out and because they got fouled, they got the opportunity to have a free play, essentially. Just a wrinkle in the rule book that I don't think a lot of people knew, other than Jim Harbaugh, I guess. And they basically got a free 3 points from that point because the Broncos were supposed to line up 10 yards away from the ball, so they were never going to block it. And the Chargers kicker hit it, and, it's only 3 points, right? It's nothing like super monumental, but either way, I felt like at that moment, when you get something so random and like crazy like that to happen, it felt like it kind of started to shift a little bit, right? And then you only look up and you're only down 8 points, and the Chargers know that they could have played better. Then I felt like the Chargers, it really started to swing in their momentum a little bit more. And as you saw in the second half, it went more in their way. Their offense opened up a little bit more, and really their defense came a lot better prepared in the second half. So that's really what led to this win. And just overall in both of these two teams, it's crazy that we're talking about them, kind of just big picture here, because there was no way I would have ever thought the Chargers and the Broncos would be in this position, but it's pretty refreshing to see just overall from last night's game and how both of them, put up like 27 and 34 points, how they've, bested their odds, they've over-exceeded expectations through, good quarterback play, good coaching, great defenses, and for them to be in these positions, it's crazy to see, but, a huge credit to them for getting this far with a rookie quarterback and a whole new, system being implemented in Los Angeles. It's pretty cool to see. So they definitely deserve major props, and they played up to the competition for the most part, so that's always good to see as well. But both of these two teams reside in the AFC, and that's really what we're going to focus on in the next segment with the Saturday games that we have coming up tomorrow in the AFC North, with the Steelers taking on the Ravens and the Chiefs taking on the Houston Texans. Potential playoff matchups in certain scenarios. We're going to go over them in the next segment and talk about some, viewpoints that I have on each game, just preview them a little bit ahead of tomorrow's game. So we'll be right back with that after this break.